Okay, well, good evening. Let me mention to you that we continue to have others than those of us here that are watching on YouTube and the internet and so forth. We've had, I think, 71 brand new people contact us since we've started this series. And let me welcome those of you that are watching. I don't do anything on YouTube, and I certainly don't know how to respond to somebody that's making the comments. There's lots and lots of comments out there on YouTube. But we've heard since we last met, and then I didn't share them last week. Richard's now made these available to me. But since we took our Christmas break, Orthodox Zoomer has written us. Danae H. Z from South Africa has written to say she's watching. Ted C. Joshua from Oregon. Corullos, IVG, and Jason, all off of YouTube. And then we've had Bill from Marietta, Georgia, contact us directly. Justin in Utah, and Father Dionysios in La Crosse, Wisconsin, that have contacted us in the last weeks or so. So again, we say welcome to you that are watching us online. I know that many of our own people are now watching us online because it's convenient to do so at other times during the week, and sometimes coming on Monday nights has not been convenient. Richard last week asked me to do something. We are now on, what's it called? Amazon Prime. And you can go just to put in, you can Google Amazon, go to Amazon Prime, or if you just Google and just put Paradise Has Two Trees, these videos will pop up. And when you're there, there's a place to give a comment, a review. And Richard has mentioned to me that those of you that are watching and those of you here who are live, if you would make a comment, it would be very, very helpful, because when you're on Amazon, I guess, the more hits you get, the longer you get to stay wherever you are. Or if you're getting reviews and people are not only hitting it, but they're saying something. So if that's your thing and you wouldn't mind to go online, of course we would hope it's going to be positive, but even if it's negative, it's okay to respond to what you're watching and maybe say something about it, and maybe even review it if you feel like you know how to review and would like to review, and tell others why they ought to be watching this along with us. I'm not very good at beating our own drums, so I'll let you guys do the drum beating instead. But Richard, I hope that helps get some of the people that you want. Tonight we're going to start with chapter 9. And if you were here last week and got a chapter 9 for last week, ready for tonight, out front there's a brand new chapter 9, because it just sometimes happens as we go over it after it's cold. You see some parts that got left out that ought to have been included. So here we go this evening in our time together. Image and likeness, number 1. We will have at least one more chapter as a separate topic that will develop this even further. We'll see where it goes. As you know, none of this exists. And it's just happening as God gives us an opportunity to be able to think about and reflect on the very topics that's there, and then to share those comments with you each time we come. Image and likeness, part 1. Face to face with the one who is. We are still at the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Genesis chapter 1, 26 stated that the goal of mankind's being created in the image and likeness of God gives us that reason we were created, to be created in the image and likeness of God. The next verse, Genesis 1:27, tells us that the image was created in us, but that verse is silent regarding what happened to the likeness. And entering into the mystery of the silence regarding likeness, last week together in our last chapter, we discovered that mankind was given the privilege of achieving the likeness with our own free will. We also discovered the error of thinking the image within us was a physical resemblance to God. With St. Basil the Great, we then come tonight to ask, how then shall we search out that which is according to the image? If the image in us is not physical, what then should we make of the divine image that is in us? Genesis chapter 1 gives that twofold purpose for the creation of mankind, given the image to achieve the likeness. We have been given the image and have the empowerment to achieve the likeness on our own. Chapter 2 in Genesis gives us the act of creation itself, the creation of mankind. And as we've done before, we have it in the Greek just so you can see, even if you don't know Greek, you can see if the word in one verse and a word in a different verse is the same look, the same, then you know what we're talking about. And molded God the man from dirt, from the earth, and creatively, blessedly breathed into the face-to-face of him the breath of life, and became the man a psyche living, became a living psyche. Well, a smoother translation, you're going, phew. Genesis 2:7 would read, God molded the man from the dirt of the earth and face to face, creatively, blessedly breathed into him the breath of life, and the man became a living psyche. At the very least, we are dirt that, through no act of our own, became living dirt. We have two parts, the visible, the dirt, and we also have something that's invisible. Now, we don't know what it is, but we know when we have it because it makes us alive, makes us living dirt. And when we don't have it, we're just dirt that's no longer alive, dirt to dirt, dust to dust. So on the one hand, as living dirt, we share a physical body, a bodily life with the animals. And on the other hand, no matter how much we have in common with the animals, there is something in us and about us that makes us different from the animals. This is so extremely basic. There is something different about us that makes us different from the animals, even though we share an animalistic kind of life, living dirt life with them. I'm calling your attention to this for just a second, simply because That world surrounding us doesn't believe that. We no longer believe mankind is different. We're just another product of evolution, the same as every other living thing, period. There's no significance. I'm not taking on the whole issue of science and evolution. That's not where we are. It's the issue of humans are somehow different from every other living thing on the planet. Not going to go into all of the evidence. The fact that we're in this kind of building might tell us that. With electricity might tell us that. With smartphones might tell us that. Having gone to the moon might tell us that. But it hasn't told that to everybody. So let us turn aside and ponder the mystery of our creation. Let us consider again Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Now the English translations translate Genesis 2:7 pretty much the same and very similar to the New King James Version that I've got printed for us there. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. That's a pretty standard, current translation of Genesis 2:7 in English. The English translation in the Orthodox Study Bible reads this way: When God formed man out of the dust from the ground and breathed in his face the breath of life, man became a living soul. There are two differences in these translations, both significant. The King James speaks of nostrils, while the Orthodox Study Bible says face. And secondly, the New King James says that we became a living being, while the Orthodox Study Bible, based on the Septuagint, says we became a living psyche, a living soul. The first difference, nostrils versus face, is due to the source used for each translation. The New King James and other Protestant versions use the Hebrew Masoretic text. Now, I don't want you to get lost. Here's what we're dealing with. There's something at work in the book of Genesis that if we want to see what's going on, what is this image and this likeness, how does it work, what's at work here, we have to pause. We have to turn aside the way Moses did at the bush to see the illumination that is coming forth, that we can see and begin to get a glimpse of what's going on. And in doing that, we have to notice some particular words. We're not debating the words, it's what the words point us to. They describe something, and it's the reality of what's being described is the difference, which is what we're looking at and seeing if we can catch. What does it make any difference to say God met Adam face to face and breathed life into him, or did he blow air into his nostrils and he came to life? Does that make it? And well, no, it's just saying he came to life. Is it? Is it? So rather than hurriedly saying it doesn't matter, just a translation, one word or the other, we're going to pause just a second. And the reason there's two different words, nostrils versus face, has to do with the source being used for Genesis. One source is the Septuagint. We're going to talk about it, and I won't explain it now. We're going to explain it here again for those of us that aren't familiar with the term, what this is, the Septuagint. And the other is called the Masoretic text. These are the two existing today different versions of the book of Genesis. The Masoretic text and the Septuagint. Now, the Septuagint is written in Greek. The Masoretic text is written in Hebrew. Now that you know what we're talking about, let's talk about it, can we? There are the differences we've talked about. And the first difference of nostrils versus face is due to the source. The New King James and all other Protestant versions of the Bible use the Hebrew Masoretic text. The Orthodox Study Bible uses the Greek Septuagint. A brief explanation of the difference between the Masoretic text and the Septuagint is helpful. One would think a Hebrew Old Testament would be first chronologically and therefore older than an ancient Israelite Old Testament written in Greek. But such is not the case. The Septuagint. The Septuagint came into existence before the Masoretic text. The translation of the Israelite scriptures from the ancient Israelite, from its Hebrew into Greek, occurred in Alexandria, Egypt, in the years following the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. The Israelites living in Egypt requested permission from the council in Jerusalem for authorization to translate the Israelite scriptures into from Hebrew into Greek. With this authorization given, the translation of the Septuagint was completed between 285 to 247 BC, 250 years before Christ. Outside of Palestine itself, the Septuagint became the Bible used in the synagogues of the Greek-speaking Jews scattered throughout the Roman Empire. They didn't know Hebrew anymore. For a long time hadn't known Hebrew. The Septuagint was therefore the Israelite Bible used by St. Paul and the other apostles as they shared the gospel with the Greek-speaking Jews and the Gentile world. The entire missionary gospel of Christianity you read about in the book of Acts, summarized by the book of Acts, took place in the Greek language and used the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint. The quotations of the Old Testament that are found in the writings of the New Testament are therefore, for the most part, from the Septuagint. Well, what about this Masoretic text then? In Palestine, after the fall of Jerusalem and the complete destruction of the Israelite temple in 70 AD, that's 40 years after the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, the council, the Jewish council, now meeting in Jamnia, called usually Javne by the Jews, began the rabbinization of the religion of ancient Israel. This rabbinization occurred in response to the extermination of the Mosaic sacrificial religion based on its temple, and secondly, as a response to the Christianization within the Israelite faith. One, they no longer had a temple, they no longer had temple worship, they had to create rabbinic synagogue worship to take its place. And that process, by the way, is not going to be completed in the Roman Mediterranean world until about the 1400s. It's going to take them 1,400 years to get all the Israelites scattered across the Roman Empire to finally come on board and be part of having a rabbi system. But the second issue is, what do we do about Jews, Israelites, becoming Christians? It is this second response that concerns us here. The apostles and other Christian Jews were making headway in converting fellow Jews to the gospel. In particular, they convincingly made use of the Septuagint, the Israelite Bible in Greek, in showing Jesus as the Messiah promised in the ancient Israelite scriptures. In order to prevent the use of the Israelite scriptures to make Jewish converts to Christianity, the rabbis authorized the Masoretes to begin creating a new collection of the Israelite scriptures using a pointing system to indicate vowels into ancient Hebrew, which contained no vowels. This new collection of Israelite scriptures, which would become known as the Masoretic text, not only sought to make the Masoretic text more accessible by indicating the vowels, making it learnable and pronounceable to a new group of people learning them, but it also sought to reduce or eliminate the use of the ancient Israelite scriptures by Christians to make converts to the Jews. Since the Christians were going to the Greek world in Greek, in order to eliminate this evangelization taking place among the Jews, the number of books in the Israelite scriptures was reduced from 53 in the Septuagint to 39 books in the Masoretic text. Additionally, words were altered to change the meaning of a text in those 39 books. For example, Isaiah 7:14 in the Septuagint says, "A virgin shall conceive," while 7:14 in the Masoretic text says, "A young woman shall conceive." In this particular instance, most Protestant Bibles translate Isaiah 7:14 from the Septuagint and not the Masoretic text, and they often indicate this by a footnote. little bitty asterisks, and down in small print you'll see it'll say either from the LXX or it'll say from the Septuagint spelled out. The Masoretic text took 800 years to complete. It was not until the 10th century that the Masoretic text was finished. In 930 CE, that's AD to us, the Common Era, Aaron ben Moses ben Asher produced the first complete Bible called the Aleppo Codex, using Masoretic symbols and ordering. That's the numbering system and the sequence of the books. For several centuries thereafter, various Masoretes continued to influence the pronunciation and writing of the text. They'd come in and change the dots, those points, to influence that word versus making it a different word. However, the first official Bible text that is still used today was the Great Rabbinic Bible, published in 1524 and 1525 by Daniel Bomberg, who happens to have been a Christian in Venice. That's 1500 AD, if you missed it. 1500 years after the birth of Christ, we finally have a finished Hebrew Old Testament for the Jews. 1500 years later. As a side note, the Septuagint is at least, therefore, 1650 to 1700 years older than the Masoretic text. Remember, the Septuagint was done by at least 250 BC, and if you add 250 BC to 1500 AD, you're now talking 1750 years. So the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, is at least 1700 years older than the Hebrew Masoretic text upon which the Tanakh is based today. Okay. The Jewish Bible that exists today did not exist for almost 1400 years, or 1500 years, or whatever you want to say, until the Masoretic text was completed and first printed in Venice in 1521 AD. That means the Bible used in the synagogues, the Jewish synagogues, and in the church, the Christian churches, the Bible, the Old Testament used in the Christian churches, was the Greek Septuagint until after 1500 AD. To put it another way, until 1525 AD, both the church and the synagogue used the same Bible for their Old Testament. They used the same Bible for 1500 years over here at the church and over there at the synagogue. When they read the book of Genesis, they read the same book, the Septuagint. For 1500 years, they read it together. That's Christians and Jews alike. So with that in mind, let's go back to that Genesis 2:7 one more time. Let us now reconsider Genesis 2:7. Now the Masoretic text the Protestant version, says God breathed into Adam's nostrils and gave him life. The scene is extremely anthropomorphic. I'll get my tongue untwisted here. That anthropomorphic we talked about last week, those pictures picturing God as a human being, remember? This image of God blowing in Adam's nostrils is an anthropomorphic image with a physical deity giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a lifeless clay figure. This metaphor conveys a particular relationship between a craftsman and his product. The product reflects the skill of the craftsman. The craftsman is dominant. The clay is subservient. That's the feel that we get when we read in our Protestant Bible, and God blew into his nostrils and he came to life. You can picture it, see it, and that's the implied message coming with it. But let us now consider again Genesis 2:7 in the Septuagint, where God breathes into the face of Adam the breath of life. There is so much more at work here than merely inflating a balloon. Boy, I'm asking you to think, right? It's Monday night and it's cold. What are we doing having to show up thinking? We go to Sunday school, we go to a Sunday school class or a Bible study, and somebody just says, here's what it means, believe it, and let's go home. Doggone it. Isn't it enough that we came out tonight? Do we have to think also? You see, God breathed on the face and imparted life to the whole, to the dirt itself. So just let us pause and reconsider. Something, rather than inflating a balloon, he breathed on, face to face. The term face translates the Greek word prosopon. The meaning of the term prosopon is revealed fundamentally by its grammatical construction and etymology, the background meaning of the terms. The preposition pros means towards, together with the noun, the ops, which in the genitive is opus, which means eye, the face, the countenance. You've heard of Cyclops? And then you got the cycle, that circle, and then you got the ops, that's the eye. Ops, prosopon, upon, has to do with the eyes. Pro is towards them in the Greek. And together, these two words form the composite word prosopon. I have my face towards someone or something. I am opposite someone or something, looking at them. Not opposite meaning opposed. The word prosopon thus functioned initially as a term indicating an immediate reference, a relationship between the two looking at each other. A relationship is implied with the word prosopon. the term prosopon has come to refer to a person. It is a term of relationship, the same as the term husband and wife. One term implies the other. You can't say husband and it mean anything if you're not implying the wife, because the word husband automatically includes the wife and vice versa. Husband and wife have no meaning independently. The same is true with prosopon. The word's primordial semantic content does not allow us to interpret personhood simply as an individuality that's outside and separate from the context of the relationship of looking at the other. It's the two people looking face to face. So the term prosopon, person, points to the fact of being opposite something or someone, looking at each other. That which is opposite to someone, something, the person, certainly would represent in our language an individual, but an individual in a relation of a dynamic actualization of a relationship. If I use the term individual, it's not interchangeable with the word person, because person means one of these two. Person, person. Sometimes we'll say person and use the word other, because it gets confusing in English, person, person. You don't get confused with husband, wife. Bingo, it's there. Okay. But you can't separate the word person out and make that an individual only any more than you can separate husband out or wife out and make them an independent operating. So the distinction, most of us today, when we say person, we actually mean individual. We just use them interchangeably. Now this goes back to St. Augustine and especially to Boethius in the 5th century, who defined the person as an individual nature endowed with rationality and consciousness, the thinking animal. Throughout the history of Western thought, the equation of person with a thinking, self-conscious individual has led to a culture in which the thinking individual has become the highest concept of anthropology. The distinction between whether we are individuals or persons is a crucial distinction. You're going, what? No, they mean the same. No, they don't mean the same. So if we are open to the possibility that being a person does not mean the same thing as being an individual, that there's really a difference between the two. And what is happening in Genesis is the creation not of an individual, but of someone called a person, the other part of a relationship. Wow, never heard of such a thing. Well, let's go on. The distinction between whether we are individuals or persons is a crucial distinction. An individual defines his existence, her existence, as an independent, isolated, and singular entity. Doing my own thing, it's just me. Everyone else, likewise, is independent, isolated, and singular entities as well. We're just a bunch of ball bearings bouncing off of each other. We are each objects, little more than toy soldiers or dolls or nutcrackers. We can pretend our toys are real, and we play our games with people, manipulating them and playing with them. Like the puppet show in the movie The Sound of Music, with the girl puppet and the goat herder puppet, or the slapstick antics of the puppets Punch and Judy. We can pretend the girl and the goat herder fall in love. We can pretend Punch slaps an unsuspecting puppet with his stick. But in reality, there's no interaction between any of it. All of it, the toy soldiers, the dolls, the nutcrackers, boys and girl puppets in the Alps, or Punch and Judy puppets, they never get to know any of the other toys. They only know the outside of everyone else. I mean, Punch is having a good time just beating up that guy. Slap. We all laugh, slap. No one ever thinks about the poor guy that just got hit. In the movie The Toy Story, in those movies, Andy, the human boy, never really gets to know Woody, his cowboy toy. To Andy, the human, Woody is who Andy says he is. It is Andy who externally defines who and what his toys are. He imparts value to them. He decides whether to be mean to them or kind to them. They have no worth or value in and of themselves to him. It's only what they mean to him. Of course, Toy Story is a metaphor of humanity. If we are only individuals, as independent, isolated, and singular entities, we treat everyone else the way Andy and the other children treat their toys in Toy Story. Everyone else is an object to be toyed with, played with, used and abused to please ourselves. We define everyone else as independent, isolated, and singular entities. Our attempt to define others as they are in themselves, without reference to their relation to whoever it is defining them, is an instance of a definition that arbitrarily presupposes their relationship with the one they are defining to be non-existent. In other words, if I define who someone is without any reference to a relationship with them or their relationship with anyone else, the definition of them that I come up with is object to object. It is a non-related, no one in a relationship individual that I'm talking about. I'm just describing a singular entity. You see, it's like walking into a store and I do not know the person on the other side of the counter. They are nothing more than a clerk, a human servant, a robot, as it were, there to serve me. I don't need to know how their day's going, what happened in their life, whether they got money for the rent or their child is sick. Clerk. I have defined that singular entity by the term clerk, not as a person that's got some kind of relationship and a relatable life going on. how I approach them. On the other hand, seeing others as persons dramatically alters the landscape. Persons are known by their relationship with others. We know the other person from the knowledge of our experience with them. Instead of people being objects, things to be manipulated, they are persons whose existence is defined by my being in an experiential relation with them. There's all kinds of experiential relationships. I can treat you like a clerk, whatever I think a clerk is, and however clerks are meant to be treated, just like I can pick up my doll and spank it and say, "Bad doll," for having done something I judged wrong. Or I can realize this entity is a person, relatable, and I can relate to them. "Hi, how are you? Hope you're having a nice day." It doesn't mean I have to know everything about them, but I can relate. It's a different approach. Seeing them as a person, not as a clerk. The movie The Renaissance Man, starring Danny DeVito, by the way, tells the story of Bill Rago, an out-of-work ad executive who believes everyone should cater to him regardless of how rude, thoughtless, and inconsiderate he is. In his first visit to the unemployment office, Bill Rago has been impatiently waiting in line. Finally, at what seems forever, it's his turn. "Clerk." Looking at his papers. "You were in advertising, I see." Bill: "Yeah." Clerk: "Princeton?" "Yeah." Clerk: "Guess that was before it was co-ed." Making a joke. My. Schools like that, you'd think they'd teach you how to read." Wrong line. Bill: "What?" "New claims are the two windows at the end. You get this form stamped, and then you get to come back to me." "What? Are you crazy? I've been here since 9 o'clock. "So have I." Next. Well, after getting his papers stamped, Bill again waits in line. The clerk: "Next." "You think there's a chance I could get unemployment before I get Social Security?" Clerk: "Have you previously collected benefits?" "No, I've always had a job." Clerk: "Can you operate any industrial machinery? Farm equipment?" "Yeah, that was a required course in college. Theory of plowing." Clerk: "Bill, I have all day. Now, why don't you tell me what you'd be willing to do?" "If you give me a check, I'd be willing to cash it." Clerk: Come here. Now, this is your first time here, right? Man your age, it can't be easy. You're humiliated, you're frustrated. I see it on 100 people's faces every day. Whether you believe it or not, I feel for each and every one of them. Now, you can either help me help you, or you can be a jackass, in which case I'm going to make you stand there until you die and turn to dust. So let's begin again. Have you previously collected benefits? No. What would you be willing to do? Milk cows, shear sheep, pluck chickens? Well, you get the picture. Bill treats everyone else as things, as objects to wait on him. Later in the movie, a second scene takes place at the unemployment office. This second scene occurs after many trips, obviously, have already taken place. The line is there, and the clerk says, "Next." Bill steps forward. "Hi, Beverly." "Bill, good to see you. How are the kids?" "Great. Everything's great." "Good. How's your daughter?" "She hates my guts." The clerk, "Well, surprise, surprise. You know, it's strange. I don't like you either, yet somehow I'm going to miss you. We found you a job." Hands him the sheet of paper. "There you go. What do you think?" Bill glances at the paper. No. Beverly, you got the wrong file. When have I ever been a teacher? Look, you got a master's degree. That means you can teach." "No, it doesn't. It only means hypothetically that I could." "Come on, Bill. Now, it's a good job, 6 weeks, a decent salary, and you get to live there." Beverly, I'll get my head blown off. Do you know how many kids carry guns to school these days?" Clerk, "In this case, all of them. I guess you didn't get to the where part." Bill's job is a temporary teaching assignment working with United States soldiers. So they all have a gun. These two scenes clearly illustrate the difference in Bill Rago treating others as objects, as things, and when he interacts with Beverly as a person. In the first scene, he interacts with a thing, a clerk. In the second scene, Beverly is no longer a clerk, but a human being that Bill now knows personally. When we interact with others as a person, we do not have a non-relationship of object to object. We do not have a non-relationship. We do not know them, the other, in their external descriptive outward sense, the ousia in Greek. We know them experientially in our interaction with them as a mystery. We know others as a presence, a parousia, not an essence, a what, but a presence to be experienced. A person is not a thing, not an object, but a presence to be experienced and with whom we interact person to person without regard to whether there is a reciprocal interaction on the part of the other. In the story, the movie, Beverly treated Bill more kindly in that first scene than Bill did. It didn't matter how Bill was acting, she never responded in kind. She always responded to him as a wounded human being, a mystery standing before her in need of a job. In other words, we understand ourselves as person relating and interacting with others as persons. We are foremost and always a person, always, and at all times interacting with others as persons, not nuts and bolts and objects and clerks. Well, this is heavy stuff. Why don't we slow it down and take a break and interact person to person and get a cup of coffee and eat some of the goodies that you've provided. We'll come back in a little bit and finish up. Thanks. You know, while you're coming back, I was just thinking, at least in my own experience, the sessions we did in the first half dealing with the tree that got chosen didn't have much life in them. And it just hit me, well, they shouldn't have. It was not the tree of life. It was the tree of death, and that's... I feel sorry for those that only came to the first half and only got the death. Even as maybe deep and abstract as this is, through it all, I think you're feeling there's some life here. There's something that's life-giving in what we're talking about so far. So that brings us then to the difference between the Masoretic text and the Septuagint. I believe this is such a critical difference because so many people coming to the Orthodox Church are Western. They may be Christian, though more and more people are coming that aren't Christian in the formal sense, but you're Christian if you're in the West and you've absorbed a certain understanding of what you think the Christian gospel is or what it is in the West, and you've got biases that aren't and have nothing to do with the real gospel. So we're really needing to, I think, look at this difference once and for all between the Masoretic text and the Septuagint. I don't mean this is the final way to do it at all, but the terms nostril or face define and characterize the relationship of the Creator with the created. Two different kinds. By using the term nostril, af in Hebrew, the Masoretic text defines the relationship between the Creator and mankind as separate objective categories. One object, Creator, interacts with another object, the created. The relationship is object to object, and this understanding of object to object is then the basis of mankind's relationship with God and mankind's relationship with one another, and even husbands to wives and rulers to subjects. God is an angry judge, choosing like Caesar who lives and dies. Those in front of Caesar are just toys to decide whether I want to save them today or kill them today. By using the term face, prosopon, the Septuagint defines the relationship between the Creator and mankind to be one of mutual engagement and interaction. The creating deity understands itself to be related to its creation. The relationship is person to person. Deity is personal and created mankind for us to be personal. Deity's behavior is always personal, directed towards the other as a person. Deity's behavior is not dependent upon the behavior of the other. Deity is always personal and interacts and behaves toward others personally. This understanding of person to person, face to face, is then the basis of mankind's relationship with God and with mankind's relationship with one another. It is this personal presence, each with the other, that creates the relationship between God and us. And it is this personal presence, each with the other, that creates the relationship between human beings. Okay, then why did the Masoretic text change the term in the first place? The Septuagint is a Jewish book translated by Jews for Greek-speaking Jews living outside of Palestine. It is a Jewish translation also used by Hellenistic Jews such as Philo in Alexandria in their conversation with Greek philosophers. It is a Jewish translation, of course, into Greek, but the Jews did it. The question, therefore, is for what reason would the Jews who translated the Septuagint now alter and change the terms of the Septuagint when they created the Masoretic text? Why would they do that? Why did they replace the word face-to-face, prosopon, with nostril? The answer is simple. The Masoretic text came into existence in part to prevent Christian Jews from converting fellow Jews to Christianity. Christianity is Jewish. It has always understood itself as being Jewish, the fulfillment of ancient Israelite history and scriptures. Christian Jews spread the story of Jesus across the Greek-speaking eastern end of the Roman Empire through the network of synagogues scattered throughout the Roman Empire. The Jewish scriptures that the Christian Jews used to preach Christ was the Septuagint. By being written in Hebrew, the Masoretic text restricted its usage to Hebrew-speaking Jewish audience. That eliminated non-Jewish Gentiles from seeking entrance into Judaism, which also was necessitated by Roman restrictions placed on the existence of Judaism within the Roman Empire. But the use of Hebrew alone did not eliminate Christian Jews from making converts of fellow Jews. By altering and changing the terms being translated, particularly those passages being used by Jews to convert fellow Jews, the rabbis wanted the Masoretes to eliminate the link between Jesus and the ancient Israelite scriptures and the claim Jesus was the fulfillment and continuation of the story and history of ancient Israel. It is outside our present task to examine further examples where the altering of the terms serves an anti-Christian purpose. However, in addition to Genesis 2:7, presently under discussion, where they change face to prosopone. Very briefly, 3 examples will illustrate the anti-Christian bias shaping the Masoretic text. So we'll just take an aside quickly. Keep in mind the church existed 40 years before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and the books comprising the Christian New Testament were all written prior to the creation of the Masoretic text. In other words, the Gospels were in place. The gospel was in place, being preached, being lived, and being experienced in the writing before the Masoretic text got done. In the ancient first, let's notice this. In the ancient Israelite scriptures, the first 5 books of Moses are followed by the 6th book. And some of you I know will probably memorize those. You've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, help me out, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and what comes after Deuteronomy? Joshua. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. Joshua, the son of Nun. Okay. The 6th book, named for the successor to Moses, who was the one who led the ancient Israelites into the land of promise. If you know the story, Moses led them for 40 years in the wilderness up to the border. He is going to die, and his successor is, in the Protestant Bible, a man named Joshua, the son of Nun, who then leads them into the promised land. That's the story in our Protestant Bibles. In Greek, the name of the successor to Moses and the name of the 6th book in the Old Testament is Jesus, Jesus. Likewise, in Greek, the name of Mary's son, who was baptized by John in the Jordan, who was crucified and raised from the dead, is Jesus, Jesus. Because of the resurrection, the church understood Jesus to be greater than Moses. In the same way, Moses was succeeded by Jesus, the son of Nun, and led the people of Israel into the promised land. So also Moses and the religion of Moses has been succeeded by Jesus, the son of Mary, who will lead God's people into the promised land of the kingdom. The successor to Moses in the Old Testament is named Jesus. The successor to Moses in the New Testament is also named Jesus. It is Jesus, not Moses. It is Christianity, not Judaism, that leads the people of God into the kingdom. In the Masoretic text, the name of the 6th book of the ancient Israelite scriptures is in Hebrew Joshua, the son of Nun. The linguistic connection of the successor to Moses is this broken when one mixes a Hebrew Old Testament with a Greek New Testament. Here's the Old Testament and the Jews in the Masoretic text talking about somebody in Hebrew named Joshua, and those Christians across the street are talking about somebody named Jesus, different person. This linguistic disconnect is found in all Protestant Bibles. Luther used the Masoretic text for his Old Testament. In Luther's Bible, the 6th book of his Old Testament is Das Buch Joshua. For his New Testament, Luther used the Greek New Testament, and the Savior's name is Jesus in that German Bible. In Protestant Bibles, therefore, in German and in English, the Savior in the New Testament does not have the same name as the successor to Moses in the Old Testament. I don't know if that's too abstract, but if you're using English, the name of the successor to Moses in the Old Testament ought to be the same name for the Son of Mary in the New Testament. If we are opting to call the Son of Mary in the New Testament Jesus, his name ought to be Jesus, the Son of Nun, in the Old Testament. In the Hebrew language, the Old Testament calls him Joshua, and in the New Testament, written in Hebrew, he would be Joshua, the son of Mary. If you translate the Christian Bible Old Testament into Slavonic Russian, its sixth book is called Jesus, whatever the word for Jesus is in Slavonic, if I don't know how you'd pronounce it. Jesu? Jesu.
Just like Greek.
Just like the Greek, Jesu. And in the New Testament, it's the same. In every language on the planet that translates the Old Testament from the Greek, along with the New Testament from Greek, the successor to Moses is Jesus in the Old Testament, and the successor to the religion of Moses is Jesus in the New Testament. One greater than Moses is here. If you believed in Moses, you would believe in me because he spoke of me. Not only is that a New Testament claim, we could point to the sixth book in the Old Testament, and it says there that it was Jesus, the son of Nun, who succeeded Moses and led the people into the promised land. We, in the West and in our English language, don't have a book in the Old Testament named Jesus. We don't have anybody in the Old Testament named Jesus because it's all based on the Masoretic text, a translation of the Hebrew that was created 1,500 years after Christ as a means to make sure Christian Jews couldn't make converts of fellow Jews. So they severed the connection between the successor to Moses and this guy named Jesus by making sure the Old Testament has a different name for the sixth book than whatever the Christians call their guy in the New Testament. Okay, that was point number one. That was quick, hopefully painless. I know you're going to have to think about that. Wow, that's incredible. Wow. You mean to tell me you can preach Christ from the Old Testament? You can preach Christ succeeding Moses out of just the sequence of the books of the Bible? How do you think that happened? Just purely by accident? When they asked what the son would be named, was it Mary that said, "His name shall be Jesus"? No accident. He was given the same name, Yeshua, the same name in Hebrew as the name of the sixth book in the Old Testament. We don't know it in English because we got a Protestant Old Testament that says Joshua and a Christian New Testament that says Jesus. Secondly, in the Septuagint, the last book of the Old Testament is the book of Daniel. It is the book of Daniel that contains the prophecy of the uncut stone that would come rolling down the mountain, hit that statue that was the successive parts of the empires of the Middle East, including and up to then the Roman Empire. The uncut stone that comes rolling was understood as a prophecy of the virgin-born Messiah, uncut from human hands. That's why in the icons of the birth of Christ at Christmas, it's always seen in a mountain. Though she was born in a cave, the icon shows the mountain, the uncut mountain that the stone prophesied by Daniel has come rolling from. So that's the last book of the Old Testament, and it's in that book you hear the prophecy of the uncut stone that's going to come rolling down the mountain, that's going to conquer all the kingdoms of the world. For Christian Jews, the meaning was clear. The Old Testament ends where the New Testament begins, with the coming of the uncut stone who would conquer the empire spoken by the prophet Daniel. In the same way that Jesus succeeded Moses in the Old Testament, likewise the New Testament followed, succeeded, and fulfilled the Old Testament. Therefore, in reducing the number of books in the Masoretic text, remember from 53 to 39, the Masoretes rearranged the sequence of the books. In the Masoretic text and in the Protestant Bible, Daniel no longer is the final book. In the Masoretic text and Protestant Bibles, the final book is Malachi, and that whole connection and that flow of rolling down the mountain into the story of Christ is totally lost. That's why the Masoretes were doing what they were doing. Make no mistake about it. The first two examples that I've just given are misrepresentations by a structural reorganization, renaming one book, reorganizing the structure. However, as in Genesis 2:7, there are many textual examples where words are altered for theological anti-Christian reasons, such as Isaiah 7:14, a young girl versus a virgin shall conceive. Another such verse is Psalm 21:17. Now, in the Septuagint, we've got a certain numbering of the Psalms. The Masoretic text has a different numbering. Boy, it only gets confusion when you got both of them. Because as long as we're only quoting out of a Protestant Old Testament, we only got one reference. But if you're looking at the two of them, they don't have the same number always. And even if they've got the same number of psalm, they don't always have the same number of verse. So what are we quoting? Well, everything I'm quoting is out of the Septuagint Psalm 21, which is Psalm 22 in a Protestant Bible, the Masoretic text. Psalm 21, they pierced my hands and my feet. Same verse in the Protestant Bible, like a lion they are at my hands and feet. Psalm 21 in the Septuagint also contains the verse, they divided my garments among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. Prophecy of the crucifixion, the Christians are going to say. It is little wonder then that in order to lessen that verse, they altered the verse 17 before it, they pierced my hands and feet. If they pierced my hands and feet and then they offered cast lots for my clothing, it's obviously a psalm predicting the crucifixion of the second person of the Trinity. But if we take at least one of those verses out, it's a lion roaring at our feet. You lessen that whole scene that comes along. The Masoretic text was created centuries after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. centuries after the birth of the church. By the way, the Septuagint, back in 250 BC, that Jewish Old Testament, uses the term ecclesia, the term translated church in the New Testament, over 79 times. So the word church is actually in the Old Testament. You wouldn't know it in a Protestant Bible at all. The Orthodox hymnology still makes reference to it when we speak of the barren church, not yet fruitful, that is, of the Old Testament, that becomes the fruitful church after the resurrection of the New Testament. Differences and discrepancies between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text should be recognized as intentional and most often done for theological reasons. Differences and discrepancies between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text should act as a red flag demanding our attention. What is there in the Septuagint that the Masoretic text found so Christian and therefore so theologically threatening that it necessitated an alteration and rewording of the text? For example, what is so significant about Genesis 2:7 in the use of prosopon, person, in the Septuagint, that the change in terminology to nostrils was necessary? What is it that we missed that is so critical the text had to be altered? Golly, how could we have missed something? We've already looked at it how many times? Genesis 2:7 yet again. And molded God the man dirt from the earth, creatively, blessedly breathed into his face the breath of life, and he became the man, into a living psyche. God molded the man from the dirt of the earth and creatively blessedly breathed into him, the person, the breath of life, and the man became a living psyche. The Hebrew Masoretic text says God blew into the nostrils of the man and he came to life. The picture in the Masoretic text is that of life being breathed into an inanimate object. It is a picture similar to mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, except, of course, there was no life in the recipient in the first place. The significance is that of relationship. Notice what kind of relationship exists in the Masoretic text between God and Adam. It is the relationship of an artificer and his artifact. It is a potter molding a product, a thing, out of clay. This concept of God as a potter is found in the Old Testament, especially in Isaiah and Jeremiah, and in the New Testament as well. But a careful reading of Isaiah 64:7 and Jeremiah 18:1-6 makes clear that the prophets are speaking about the nation of Israel, that is the clay vessel created by God the potter. They're not talking about a single entity called a person that's made out of clay that gets life breathed. They're talking about a vessel that holds people. That's what the potter has made. It is an unruly nation that is being chastised like a piece of clay that won't yield to the potter. It is as a vessel of people, not a single person that is being spoken of. St. Paul in Romans chapter 9, 20 through 26, makes use of that Jewish understanding of their corporate identity being a vessel created by God. He reminds the Jews that God is the creator of the Jewish vessel as well as the Gentile vessel, in order that God might make known the riches of His glory on the vessels of His mercy. Not the single, but on the church and the synagogue holding His people, the vessel, which He had prepared beforehand for glory, even as whom He called not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. It is the stubbornness of the vessel not to let anyone that's not of us into the vessel that was being dealt with, not one-on-one people being called vessels. The potter who created the Jewish vessel has also created a new vessel of mercy, a new vessel that contained all who respond to the call to be part of this vessel of mercy, both Jews and Gentiles. The vessel is not a human being. It is a whole that contains the human beings. It's the church that has been remade by the potter out of the original vessel of clay that he had, Israel. He's now enlarged it to allow Gentiles into it as well. Western Christianity, and Protestant Christianity in particular, misunderstood the image of the potter, as the lyrics of this Protestant hymn make clear. Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after thy will, while I am waiting, yielded and still. It's a poignant passage, but look at the relationship. God is an artificer. We're just an artifact. We have no will. We are an object. You see that relationship that's being defined. In this hymn, the potter metaphor is a relationship between unequals, a relationship between an artificer and a thing, an object, an artifact created by the maker, the artificer. The metaphor of a creator who longs for an active, participatory, and dynamic relationship, on the other hand, not being found in Western Christianity, is found instead in the 19th century story of Geppetto carving the puppet Pinocchio out of wood. The Masoretic text does not permit Adam to be understood as a Pinocchio, because it does not permit God to be understood as a Geppetto. In the Masoretic text, God does not have an active, participatory, and dynamic relationship with Adam, but the story of Pinocchio, shaped by 1,800 years of the gospel anyway, by hearing it, does point us to a Christian understanding that God is such a God. Isn't it interesting? The cry in our heart is for God to be like Geppetto, instead of that angry God sending every one of us to hell because we're worthless lumps of clay. The cry was there because we were created with that cry in us, to be in a loving, participatory relationship with our Creator. It's in us, created. We have the image in us. Therefore, let us examine yet again Genesis 2:7 in the Septuagint, which does not contain the term nostril. In the Septuagint, it uses the term prosopon. We discussed this term previously as the relational term person. You will recall several weeks ago, in relational terms are, from Aristotle, labeled them this, defined them for us, as Aristotelian relatives, things that stand in relation to each other in such a way that the relation is constitutive of their identity. That constitutes the identity. Husband, wife. That relationship constitutes the identity of what the word husband means, and you can't have a definition of husband separate from being constituted, created by the relationship and the nature of that relationship itself. It is the identity of the whole, the relationship itself, that constitutes and creates the seemingly separate identities, whether it's God and Adam or whether it's you and me. Looking at you, me, whatever. It's the relationship that defines who we are, our identities in that. The use of prosopon is not accidental in the Septuagint. It signals and identifies that in this instance, creation, God is creating more than a clay puppet to play dolls with. God is doing more than creating a clay puppet to play dolls with. Do I have to get loud for it to sink in? God is doing more than creating a clay puppet to play dolls with and to get angry at when it disappoints him. He's doing something else. While God, the us that is always other than his creation, nonetheless, with Adam, he creates a relationship and establishes a relationship that is a whole, that constitutes and simultaneously a simultaneous relational identity between God and Adam. This is an existential relationship, and there is then this existential identity. As the following description from the Freiburg Analytical Greek Dictionary Lexicon will make clear. I just want you to see this. We're not making any of this up. The word prosopon, you see it there? Number one, it means face, countenance. Literally, as part of the body, it means the face, literally. Figuratively, denoting a personal presence. You're present, you're in person, you showed up in person. I'm here, not by proxy, my presence. As an idiom, it means face to face. Ever heard the phrase eye to eye? We saw eye to eye. Boy, we were eyeball to eyeball on that. You can't get any more agreement than being eye to eye, eyeball to eyeball on the topic that's there. Face to face, in person, openly, personally to one's face, with the presence of, being with someone, in front of, ahead of them. They're all there. He's also got in parentheses every time the word prosopon is used in the New Testament, not every time, but examples where you can look and it means that. It's that relationship, like trying to define husband without the wife. You can't do it. You can't just define the word separate from the context of a relationship. The us which is did not create Adam to be a thing, an object, an individual. The us created Adam to be another, to be a person in relation to the us. Adam was created to relate with God face to face and eye to eye. The one who is did more than blow air into an inflatable doll. He breathed upon Adam. He blessed Adam with his personhood, empowering breath. The dirt did not only become living dirt, the living dirt was empowered with personhood, the capability of being related to an other, the capability of being an us with another. What do you have if you have you and another? We went to town. This happened to us. The two become the us. The two become the we. So who is Adam? Adam is a person, not an it, not an object, not a thing. Adam is a person. A person is a half of an us. A person is not a singularity, not an individual. Like husband includes wife, person includes other. The one who is personal. The us who is the three persons of the Trinity. Within itself, Trinity is personal. Trinity creates atoms to be a person in relation with Trinity. This is not a relationship based on essence or nature. It is a relationship based on the behavior of the two. It is a relationship between God and Adam. Internally in the Trinity is intrapersonal, inside the Trinity, relating intrapersonally within itself. Externally, the Trinity is relating interpersonally, like interstate commerce between, interpersonally with Adam. And Adam is created to relate interpersonally with Trinity and interpersonally with every other human being that comes. Adam is not what Trinity is, but Adam is how Trinity is existentially, how it relates. Trinity exists as persons, personally, inside itself. This is how Trinity is. God does not change Adam's dirt. It's still dirt. He changes Adam's how. Trinity allows Adam dirt to be in a relation, allowing for communion with each other's very being, albeit without a change of what each of them is. God doesn't change who Adam is, dirt. He changes how Adam behaves with God and with his fellow humans. We do not change who someone else is. We change how we behave toward them. We change how we behave toward them. God's behavior towards us is not dependent on our behavior towards Him. Likewise, my behavior towards you is not dependent on your behavior towards me. Sure it is. This is how the world responds to everything. This is who Adam Dirt is. This is who a human being is. We are persons. We are created as unique and non-repeatable entities to be half of an us in how we relate to the Creator and how we relate to fellow human beings. I'm half of an us. I'm always looking to shake hands with the other half. If it's just hi, hello, and then to go shake hands with everyone I meet can be the other half for a moment. Hello. I am a half of an us. Wow, what a self-identity to be created as, in the image of God, as half of an us. So human existence is constituted as a relationship. How we relate to God. We're half of an us with the Trinity. We are not individuals. We're persons, which means we're half of an us. Wow. That's kind of fun. That's kind of fun. That's what Adam and Eve turned down. No, thank you. Well, let's come back next week, God willing, and we'll see what else is going on. At some point, we're going to get beyond Genesis 2:7, I promise you. God bless you. Thank you.